Why are 72% of entrepreneurs directly or indirectly impacted by mental health conditions? Our guest today is Chase Damiano, and he is the founder of Human at Scale, which is a leadership development company that helps intentional leaders to elevate their teams, to scale their businesses, typically resulting in saving 10 to 20 hours a week, 2xing their team productivity and engagement, and 2 to 5xing their annual revenue growth. That's pretty impressive results. Chase, welcome to the Leaders Transformation. We're glad you're here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole, for having me.
It is a pleasure. And of course, we would be remiss without doing a shout out to Brian Wish, who was on this show back in episode 452. And he's the one who connected us. So, Brian, shout out to you. Thank you so much. And I know you were part of Arcbound and his program, and that's how you got to meet him. And he's doing some awesome things in the world. So we appreciate you.
Yeah, he really is. I'll instead of giving a shout out to mom, I'll say, hi, Brian.
There you go. And we'll make sure he's tagged so he knows that. So when we're talking about him. So let's talk about this mental health crisis. And, even among the most talented and driven entrepreneurs who have a lot of resources around them, you work with a lot of founders, maybe you can talk about that. But even among those individuals who have all of these resources and opportunities, there's this crisis brewing. Talk about that, and then of course we can talk about how we resolve that so we can avoid it.
Yeah, so having worked with several hundred founders, met with several hundred founders over the length of my very short career, I've noticed that the language that sometimes that we use to describe ourselves, and especially the state of mental health, tends to be some of the language that is also pervasive in traditional mental health diagnoses. So founders will use language to be like, oh, that's the ADHD coming out of me, or oh, that's I have these surges of energy, that's like my manic coming out. And you had the statistic right, there's actually a large portion of entrepreneurs that either identify directly or indirectly of having one or more mental health conditions. And when I read that research, I believe it was in 2015, from a paper called "Are Entrepreneurs Touched with Fire?" It really opened up my awareness towards, wow, I see these patterns play out in my work, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. But sometimes it can be very torturing for the founder, because they're not necessarily aware of what is happening within their bodies or their minds as a result to impacting their startup. And I was one of those. When I launched my first company, I got to see the version of myself that was at the highest capacity, the most amount of effort, the largest amount of personal change that had happened in my life up to date. And it brought out the best in me, and also like the most difficult and crunchy and challenging experiences within me that I wasn't really sure how to manage internally until I got the resources that I needed in order to be able to grow and change. And so it just got me really curious to something about us as entrepreneurs. We self-select into roles in which there's high intensity and a level of risk tolerance, and a level of having short feedback loops between our effort and results that come from that. All the very exciting things that happen in entrepreneurship, but also just how much of a toll could that be taking on our minds and our bodies and our relationships. And it just launched me into a pattern of questioning to explore this topic more.
So when you were talking, I was visualizing this mountain. The higher up the mountain you get, the more steep it is on the other side and the edges. So it's like you're at your peak. You mentioned about like the highest level of performance, and yet at the same time you're also perhaps even the highest risk of falling off the edge. And we don't see it that way. We almost feel like we're insulated from it, when that's probably the opposite.
Yeah, and I absolutely see it, especially something about the entrepreneur's experience gravitates us towards not talking about these things. I believe that's more of a societal pressure. We see amazing founder stories on social media platforms. We read them in books. We read all these success stories, and we start having a belief that, okay, I can do this too, and it's going to be all rosy, and it's going to be all successes. When in reality, that comes with some survivor bias. We're not hearing about the hundreds of other stories that didn't pan out, the things that didn't go as well to and not create a large outcome or a large impact into the world. And I'm on a mission to uncover more of those stories. I believe that entrepreneurs like myself will sometimes rather suffer in silence than be more vulnerable with what might be really going on with us internally. And who are we going to talk to about it? We're not going to bring our personal concerns to our investors, most likely. Why? Because we sometimes have a feel that we need to look confident in front of them. We need to look strong. We need to look like we know what we're doing. We're certainly not going to bring these to our employees for all the same reasons. Having this narrative, this belief is like, oh, they joined this startup to trust me, to be, have faith in me and my abilities. I can't show any vulnerability or quote unquote weakness to them at all. And this is sometimes stuff that's even more difficult for a co-founder or even your spouse or significant other to understand. Simply that the way that your mind operates and the language that you speak could be so foreign to your partner or spouse or significant other, in a way in which you may not feel understood. You may have an internal narrative that says, well, they just don't get it as much as like another entrepreneur would. Yet we as entrepreneurs sometimes don't talk to each other and share more of that internal experience. So that's where I see the challenge.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people you mentioned about stakeholders, investors, employees, even spouses and co-founders. They're often, they're looking up to us, right? In being a founder, they're looking up to us as it's trusting that we know what we're doing, counting on us to know what we're doing. So I think about the spouse. If someone comes and says, man, I'm feeling really struggling with depression, or I'm really struggling with this feeling or that feeling, they might be like, oh crap, right? Like if you're struggling, then where does that leave us? Where does that leave me? I'm kind of counting on you to know what you're doing, and so it puts a lot of pressure on the founders. And I think we also then, of course, put a lot of pressure on ourselves based on society and all of that. Let's talk about the telltale signs, because like you said, a lot of people won't talk about it. A lot of founders won't talk about it. They don't have a circle. That's why coaching, this whole industry has exploded. Now they hire a coach. Now you can talk. I have clients who will talk to me about stuff that they may not talk to their spouse about in terms of their concerns about the business, because their spouse is on the outside of that business, isn't working in that business. And when they come home, that's not what they want to talk about, is the stresses of the business, and bring that into their home life, right? They want to enjoy their family, though, and their kids and all of that. And so, let's talk about those telltale signs that we can recognize in ourselves, and or that others can recognize in us, to be able to support us through that process and maybe create the space for healing to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I see a number of patterns that come out that I tend to see in founders and entrepreneurs. And I'll tell you, Nicole, as well, like these, I speak to these because these are also patterns within myself. Like this is also a version of me and a connection with that version of me in which, left unchecked, left unsupported, these proclivities will come out in ways that are actually not constructive. They're actually quite destructive. The first one is workaholism, where we as founders can sometimes self-justify working an inordinate number of hours in order to
I wouldn't know
move the
anything about
business
that.
forward. Wouldn't know anything about that, right? Me neither. We self-justify. We say to ourselves narratives like, I'm just doing what it takes. I have the hustle. Like, I'm going to give it my all. And we disproportionately invest, we invest a disproportionate number of hours every week, every month, every quarter, every year into our business at the sacrifice of other areas of our lives. And here's what happens. The business can move forward, absolutely, but also the costs start adding up. So I myself have self-justified work instead of seeing family, instead of connecting with friends, instead of exercising. I mean, Nicole, I've instead of eating, the number of founders out there that are routinely just skipping through lunch and not giving their bodies the full amount of nourishment that they actually need in order to sustainably be able to operate. It's astounding. But we self-justify. And some of that also comes from not having the right role models to know what something more healthy, more sustainable can look like, because that might not come from the entrepreneurial world. That might not come from another founder story. For me, in my first company, I unintentionally lost 20 pounds simply because I stopped eating, because I was working, because I was drinking a lot of coffee and keeping myself falsely high in my energy in that way. And that wasn't 20 pounds to lose. I started looking at skin and bones. And it was just this intensity of work that required so much of my energy. It couldn't possibly go to anywhere else. I've had experiences where I would wake up at 1, maybe 2 in the morning and have an enormous amount of energy, believing in that moment I was just having such creative and the best ideas that I needed to go work on them right now. Because if I didn't work on it, then it would somehow get lost. Very routinely in my first company, spending the hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., 6 a.m. working on things at an unsustainable pace. So that's how workaholism has shown up for me and other founders that I've worked with.
So I can relate to that. When I was in my 20s and I thought I was invincible and I was working 120 hours a week, and I didn't realize it at the time. It was only later that I started to calculate the time that I would be getting up and that I would be going to bed and what I would do and all this kind of stuff. And then I realized, yeah, I'm working 120 hours a week. So when people said, oh man, I'm working 50 hours, I'm like, man, what do you like? It's a part-time position or what? Because for me, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it, what I was doing. It was a lifestyle. And at some point when there was some difficulty in our business was falling apart. And I've talked about that on this podcast, where in different ways, or in other podcasts, talking about how, we poured all of what we had into this business. And then it started to, different things. We were in business with people that didn't have the same values and mission and all of that. At that moment, then all of a sudden it felt like it was like my body said, yeah, I'm tired, because the reward now wasn't there, the thing to look towards. But even if it is there, you get to that point where, as I said, with me, it's just like my body wasn't going to come on this journey with me. And it started to shut down. And at that point, then I realized how much I had neglected myself. I didn't see it as neglect. I saw it as, I'm on mission and I'm doing it, right? We're making this thing happen and I'm going to work hard, and then I'm going to have the rest of my life to play hard, kind of thing. And it's like one day, delayed gratification, one day we're going to have all this fun, and you don't always get there. There's a lot of people that don't make it that far.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be that way. Yeah.
And it does not need to be that way. In fact, some founders don't enjoy hearing this, but when I hear stories of working, upwards of 70, 80 hours plus, I believe that it is also a form of laziness.
Talk about that.
Yeah, let's unpack that. So especially in the early stages, the founders tend to be more time rich and cash poor. As a result of that, as well of the arc of their learning, they have to learn so much and takes in so much information in order to then execute and take action and grow the business. And so as founders, we tend to over-index and over-allocate time investment as a way to catch up to capital. However, if there is this belief of being all in, first of all, no matter who you are in the world, every human that's ever been born only has 24 hours a day. And there's an upper limit of just how many hours that you can actually allocate. And I find that there's actually the law of diminishing returns come in. The amount of output that you can create between the 44th and the 45th hour in your week is typically a lot higher than between the 89th and the 90th hour. Why? Is because you haven't been fueling your body or sustaining your pace at something something more sustainable. We are simply just throwing hours at the problem, and we start losing any discretion for exactly where those hours are going. I can't tell you the number of times where I have just spent a lot of time working through an infinite to-do list of priorities, just spending hour over hour executing with no discretion for what I was actually executing. There's no strategy. There's no strategy underneath. And so I call it in this form of laziness because there's no intention, or a limited amount of intention or thoughtfulness that goes into exactly what you are working on in order to drive the business forward, invoking things like leverage or strategy, as opposed to just a spray and pray amount of hours.
Yeah, and that law of diminishing returns, I've experienced that and talk a lot about that actually with clients, because you're absolutely right. You just keep working, and then it's like it takes longer and longer to get something done, versus if you take a break and you come back at it, man, you can get it done in such a short period of time because you're focused, you're clear, you're energized, and you're ready to go. I was thinking about the laziness and coming back to the name of your company, which is Human at Scale, which implies productivity and implies scaling our humanity. There's many things that I'm sure are included in that. But thinking about the laziness, and I know this for myself, is that sometimes it's easier just to do it myself than it is for me to have to think through building a team and having other people do it and scaling that way. It's just you go into this old pattern. I know a lot of people do that. A lot of founders are just like, if it is to be, it's up to me. If I want it done right, I'm going to have to do it myself. And I don't want to bother thinking through and challenging themselves to move to that place of delegation.
That's right. And that's another pattern that I see is fear of delegation, or subscribing to a self-narrative in which it is easier to do it myself. And there are absolutely situations in which that applies 100%. But if that is the default, then what that will mean is that all hard challenges in the business will flow to you. All hard questions from your team will flow to you. And all difficult decisions on the team will flow to you. Why? Is because with the narrative of it's faster to just do it myself, we under-train and under-empower our people to perform in our stead. We're not clear about the expectations. We're not clear about how they can make autonomous decisions. We're not clear about the process to drive certain outcomes. We're not clear about the success metrics that validate and measure our performance across the company. It all remains in our heads. And without taking the time to slow down, think through those things, get your team bought in, train the team on doing that, we will always take what we perceive as the short road. The easier path is always, well, I'll just do it myself. Why would I ever delegate something that would take someone on my team 5 hours to do? I'm going to do it in 30 minutes. Why would it ever make sense to me to delegate? And that is the mindset that can get you stuck. Instead, investing the resources in the team to permanently get it off your plate, and it allows you as the founder, entrepreneur, to think of higher level problems. If you're constantly stuck in recurring work on the 30-minute, hour-long level, then that's where your mind and attention will go, as opposed to thinking big picture about the vision and direction, the mission, the opportunities, the disruption that we can create in the marketplace.
Yes. And I think that underneath it, I've challenged myself in that as well. It's like, so when I find myself doing that, right, and saying, I'll just do it myself, or being reluctant, right, to let it go, is actually recognizing that I'm operating from a place of scarcity.
Yes.
Even in, and this is so crazy, like when you think about how much conversation is out there about living in abundance, and all of that, and abundance mindset, consciousness, and yet even in that space, I have met so many people that actually operate, without knowing it, operate from a deep-seated scarcity, which justifies their actions. Can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective, what you see?
Yeah, absolutely. We can operate from this place of lack, this place of scarcity, this place of not having enough or not having our needs met. And through that, it then keeps us in a place exactly where we are. As opposed to, and these are also remote emotional responses as well. Whether we like it or not, we as humans are emotional creatures. Sorry, founders that believe you are entirely 100% quantitative and objective. It's just simply not true. We have a subjective lens in our humanism, and we are finite in that way. And so given all of that, I find that even within myself and with other entrepreneurs, first starting with a felt sense of safety and having and experiencing that felt sense of safety, in which, were anything to happen under any condition, under any market shift, under any obstacle that might come in the way, it's actually all going to be fine. It's all actually in service for us. It's all supporting us in a myriad of ways that we might understand and not understand. All of it is in service to our growth. And if we can really adopt that mindset, then maybe it sounds like a stretch to some listening to this, but anything can be possible. And through that possibility, that is the level of abundance in which we as leaders can go into uncertain situations and then have the level of clarity and decision making that allows us to make orders of magnitude level of change. By operating from the place of at the end of the day, it's going to be fine.
Yeah. Talk about, and I don't know if you've noticed this, is that even in the most successful people, and I know we're digging into kind of the issue, and then we're going to come around with a solution, some suggestions, you've weaved them in, but we'll get more specific on that. But this idea of not enoughness and the imposter syndrome and how that all ties in, because I think that drives many of us, that deep-seated, like trying to work so hard to prove that I'm enough.
Right. And I can speak to this, Nicole, from my firsthand experience. In my first company, as a chief operating officer and on the board of managers, I felt, despite my role, a massive amount of imposter syndrome. I felt that there were long periods of time in which I didn't feel that I belonged in my position, that I deserved to be there, that especially in speaking with investors in the external world. And it was just something about my psyche at the time in which I could not experience the level of abundance we were just talking about. There were periods of time in which one of our strategies was around building coffee shops, and I just remember sitting in the coffee shop, completed, beautiful location, lots of foot traffic. People have an amazing experience, 5-star reviews on Yelp and Google, sitting there at the table, just simply not being able to enjoy a cup of coffee because it never felt like enough. Nothing I ever did felt like enough. And who did it not feel enough to? Me. This perpetuated a sense of achievement, continuous achievement, in which I was always reaching for a ever-moving goalpost. As soon as something was created, it would just move things in a way and be like, it wasn't enough. And it never was enough. just due to the relationship that I had perpetuated with achievement in itself, where some part felt that in order for me to be worthy, I needed to achieve. And I find this with many entrepreneurs out there, that if they're not constantly in motion, not constantly achieving or doing great things, then it might destroy them internally. The experiencing the felt sense of low self-worth is terrifying, because who am I if I'm not achieving things? Who am I really? And that was something very large that I had to unwind for myself over a number of years of practice, of just like knowing that irrespective of what I achieve or not achieve, I am already enough. And for anyone listening, and if that sounds like you are already enough.
Yeah. So how do you get founders to get to that point of enoughness? So it's like rebuilding the house, right? In the midst of they're building a company and they're trying to scale the business. Now you're talking about breaking down and scaling them up.
Yeah. So we're now in the realm of we're not talking about strategies to grow the startup or the company. We're not talking about acquisition costs or MRR or LTV or any other metrics that are going to grow your startup. What we're talking about is you. What we're talking about is the individual, the person who is running this business, that's driving the growth, driving the show. And so it requires first a deep introspective look. I always recommend meditation and yoga and journaling and somatic experiencing and other modes of therapy to help us see more internally what are the hidden beliefs or self-perceptions that actually could be holding us back in ways that we do not consciously understand. I love using different typing tools. Myers-Briggs always has like the jury out on its scientific validity, but using Enneagram or Big Five or DISC or other team inventories, and especially doing many of them and then looking at the patterns in between, you're feeding it data. And in the question answering, you're learning more about yourself when you receive this back. Each of these are tools that can act as a mirror to help you understand yourself, your behaviors, your patterns, both consciously aware of or completely hidden to you. I also advise leaders to do a leadership 360. Talk to your team, talk to your co-founder, talk to your investors, talk to your loved ones, talk to your trusted friends, talk to your partners, help them give you feedback, help structure for them a way to give you something that is valuable and constructive to you, all in the name of growing your conscious awareness towards more of who you are, how you are showing up, how you communicate, and how you lead. It's all about looking in the mirror.
Yeah, and I love that, because I love using those tools, and I find that when we do that, and I've done that for myself, and I go back and listen and reread them, and there's certain ones at certain times in my life where I'm like, I just needed some perspective. And so I would do this exercise, and I'll go back, and some of them are really on point, where it's like, wow, that just resonated. And I find in that, as I learn more about myself, and as I help clients learn more about themselves, that there's that confidence, and just like you said, the enoughness. Everything's going to be okay. I'm okay. And here's everything that I am. And then also looking at it and saying, here's everything that I'm not, and recognizing that, so that you can operate and say, how can I operate more in these areas where I'm strong, and either address these areas if it's a character issue, or, certain things that need to be addressed. Or I can delegate it. I can find complementary team members and people that can help me out in those areas, but not trying to do it all and never feeling like enough. I find that we take our weaknesses and we compare our weaknesses to other people's strengths. And even at the highest levels, right? We're still looking, it's like you said, if we have a not enoughness conversation going on, I'm still going to look at you and go, man, look at these. I mean, got all this going on or whatever, or this person, I should be like this person, or I wish I had more of that. And it's a never ending battle because you're never going to have that.
It's never ending. And one reframe that I have found helpful for myself as well as my clients is if you want to compare, if you really want to compare to your past self. Give yourself credit and acknowledgement for the journey and the progress that you have made. And also, this is a sense like publicly too. It's like, it's never a good look to publicly criticize and compare yourself to others. It's great to have the awareness to publicly compare yourself to yourself. People celebrate that because people want to celebrate success stories. And you yourself, dear founder, listening to this, have already made tremendous progress. You already have. It's just about acknowledging the portions of yourself. Like, you are so different than you were a year ago. And you were so different than you were 5 years ago. And just refreshing and acknowledging that journey can really be a great therapeutic technique to help with this, to see that you indeed are worthy.
Yeah. So meditation, you mentioned about yoga and some of these different things, somatic intelligence. I had a guest on a number of years ago, Hen Lizra, it was her name, and she talked about somatic intelligence. Talk a little bit about, as you're working with founders, like if somebody's listening here and they're like, okay, busted, this is me. You've described me one after the other, let's say. And they're like, okay, well, where do I start? What would you tell them?
Yeah, good question. So one early area to look that has been really beneficial for me has been nervous system regulation. And so what I mean by that is that we in our bodies have a felt sense and an experience of the fight response or the flight response or the freeze response in a myriad of different situations. This is taking us upward to the edge of our what's called a window of tolerance in what our nervous systems have a capacity for doing. So let me give you a tactical example. A number of times I have entered coaching calls with a client in which a client might have 6 or 7 back-to-back meetings right before the call. Have you ever, Nicole, had that experience? Yes. And we know what it looks like. It's just like, you can tell they're like a little bit distracted. They haven't really taken a break today. They have maybe a heightened sense of energy. Their heartbeat actually might be pulsing a little bit faster. Sometimes I see it as a nervous movement, either wrestling or bouncing of the leg, or like a desire to move their body. Sometimes I see it as, especially if they're in a standing desk, they'll just like start moving around the space. And tracking that, what that signals to me is that their nervous system has been activated and they might not be properly ready for deep coaching work. Why? Like hard time listening, they're thinking of their to-do list, they haven't things are in motion for them. And so nervous system regulation becomes the key. And if we can just help re-regulate their nervous systems, and even better, teach them to self-regulate their nervous systems, then it can create for a much better founder experience as well as deeper transformation. And so one of the techniques that I teach is self-contact and orienteering. And so one, self-contact being, because we tend to experience, especially either a fight or flight response here in our core, it's moving our energy towards the outer parts of our body. So I'll guide clients through a meditation in which is like, okay, feel your fingers and move them like this. And I want you to feel and notice, what do your fingertips feel like? It's like, can you feel how hot might they be? How cold might they be? Can you feel the grooves?
Yeah, they're not hot or cold, but yeah, there's some, they feel almost like not sticky. I don't know if it's the right word. Yeah.
Not sticky, amazing. And then similarly with your toes, you feel where your toes are, either directly in contact with the ground or inside socks or shoes, and the texture of that experience and what that might feel like.
Yeah.
And so And we can also do this with stroking our arm, which is just
Mhm.
like, okay, feel your hand coming in contact with your arm, your forearm, and feel its smoothness or its roughness. How warm or how cool might this be from the perspective of your hand?
Mm.
And then now move to the perspective of your forearm. Like, what is it like to be touched by your hand? Do you feel the roughness or the
Mhm.
smoothness of the fingertips? And you can do so with the other side. And ongoing does the practice. And we can do this for a very short period of time. I find that takes the either a dysregulated nervous system or one that's highly in flight, especially, and like just brings some calm and some centering back into the body.
Mhm.
It reduces some of the either worry or anxiety that also might come with such a response. So that's one technique that I bring to my clients and for me.
Well, I love that, and it's so simple. It's so simple, and it's a presence exercise. It's presencing yourself in a
Yes.
way, right? You're presencing yourself to yourself, where you actually recognizing, hey, I'm here. I'm right here. I'm not back there, and I'm not up there. I'm right here. And interesting, I think there's definitely value in like that, even the human contact. And we think about somebody else. I want to hug from someone else, or I want to massage because I need that. And we all do. We need that human connection. And in this way, we actually get that opportunity to connect to ourselves, and we're not leaving that up to someone else to give that to us. So we can do that for ourselves. And even you're sitting in a meeting and you're feeling that, or you're getting ready to be on stage or whatever, you could do that. And it's simple, and it's not going to look super weird, or like I've got to go somewhere and meditate for 30 minutes, but
Mm,
I can do that right in that moment. And it's subtle, and I'm just presencing myself to that. So that's really good. Thank you.
yeah. And in doing so, it helps us in this act of presencing. It helps us as fast-paced entrepreneurs get more strategic about our actions. All of a sudden, the hundred of worries of a never-ending to-do list, suddenly we can step away from, even for a brief period, and ask ourselves the question, what actually is truly important?
Mhm.
But yet the challenge, especially for entrepreneurs, is this belief that we are superhumans. And while there's lots of we are super in that way, but not in the way that they think, not in the way that we think, in which is like, no, we can't continuously run on 3 hours of sleep per night. No, we can't continuously not take care of ourselves for long periods of time. No, we're not built in a distinctly and statistically different way in which we can outpace our own humanity. We're not robots and we're not machines, even though that's the narrative or the language that we sometimes use to describe ourselves. It's like, oh, you're just getting it done. You're like a machine, trying to indicate that that is somehow superior to our beautiful humanism that we are. And so we can't make ourselves into machines, even though we're trying to. This is more about being strategic and being present and having presence, especially in front of your team and other stakeholders.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've been called a machine. And it's like,
Same here.
yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing. So yeah, thank you for that. So as we I think about the founders that are listening that are saying, wow, okay, I really need to address this. And then there's in the back of their mind thinking, okay, how is this going to help me grow my business? So talk a little bit about, just briefly, some of the examples of, maybe without names or whatever, but examples of how this has impacted their effectiveness in their
Definitely.
business and their success.
I'll tell the story of one co-founder, COO, that I had the pleasure of working with over a 18-month period of time on numerous topics. But there was one period of that time where we were very specific and intentional around this one area. And what she was experiencing is something similar to what I experienced as COO of my first company. Was I feel like I'm everywhere. I feel like I have all my fingers in all the pies being baked all across the company. I have an L2 leadership team, but I can't find myself in a position where I'm getting any of my time back. It feels to me that I have to constantly handhold everyone around me. And now I'm worrying, did I hire the right people to do these roles at all? The challenge that she was experiencing is that initially, the initial hypothesis that she had was that the challenge was exterior to her, in which is like you can take your finger and like sort of like look around and scan externally to you as like, well, is the challenge in the business? Is the challenge with this person? Is the challenge with a process? Is the challenge around expectation? Is the challenge around performance? And you can look around, but the issue is you're never going to find it until you turn your finger and look within. Maybe the challenge isn't actually external. Maybe it's one internally. And so that's where our work began. And part of what she inevitably implemented was a series of an operating system for her team to be able to run with performance, to agreed upon expectations, but also to check herself and how her behaviors were creating the very condition that she was trying to avoid, which takes tremendous work and self-awareness to go deeply and making a connection between what have my actions been and how that ties to results. So as an example, having to, one specific story was she had given a process, delegated a process to an individual to run while she went on vacation. And I asked her to show me, what did you delegate? And it was a piece of paper. It just said, please do this process. And then she left for vacation and came back shocked to find that it hadn't been done properly. So building the awareness and the curiosity around, well, why was that the case? We can't just jump to a conclusion that that person is not suited for the job. We as leaders need to set our team up for success and give them every possible resource to be able to carry forth the mission that we are giving them. That was our work over that period of time. We put in success metrics, we put in processes, we put in expectations, we put in decision-making trees, and built herself a system that allowed her to ultimately 5x her revenue within a 12-month period of time. Why? She was no longer the bottleneck to growth. She was no longer involved in every portion of the business, and in fact, learning that it's not more that we as founders need to be doing in order to grow. In fact, it's less. And that's a very challenging lesson to learn the first time. I know I had tons of issues in learning that lesson for the first time, because it doesn't make any intuitive sense, especially for high achieving individuals that are really, really good at getting things done. Because that lens is like, okay, double the amount of effort, then I'll double the amount of results. And that works great up until a point, especially that human limit of you can really only do anything with 24 hours that you have been given on a daily basis.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story of a managing partner of an MGA who had about 1,400 advisors, and we were talking about training and stuff, and he says, I've got this one advisor who works harder than anyone else, and he's just such an absolute go-getter and a beast. He said, but I keep telling him that if he would slow down, he would double his business.
Mm.
And I never forgot that. I was like, wow, how many of us, if we just slow down, would double our business? And you mentioned about a bottleneck. It occurred to me one day as I was working with a leader that the bottleneck, you look at any bottle, the bottleneck's always at the top.
I
It's
love
always
that.
at the top. And wow, we look at the, like you said, looking outward and all the things down the line, but let's look where the bottleneck actually is, and then you can make the impact that you really want. So this has been so good, Chase. Thank you so much. And man, there's so many things that we could talk about here. Let's talk about where people can find out more about what you do, and what would be the first step with them if they said, I'm curious, my interest is piqued. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, so you can find my work at human@scale.com. And there is a strategy session that I offer to folks that are curious, to at least let them walk away with a game plan on what a support system for themselves might look like. That's something I'm happy to offer. I also have coming out a masterclass on a subject very near and dear to my heart called How to Get Out of the Weeds. It's a challenge that that we face as entrepreneurs. Again, it's like, how do I manage my life if I'm just like my work is like 80 hours a week plus? Like, how do I get out of all this stuff? And it requires that mindset shift that we discussed today, Nicole. For those that are interested in that, find me on the strategy session page of the website and submit a form, and I'd be happy to give anyone that submits it a free copy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chase. I appreciate you. You're awesome. And I love your groundedness and just simplicity. You know, there's such simplicity and wisdom and simplicity. And we sometimes think we need to have these complicated regimes, and sometimes it's the simplest things that make the biggest difference. And so I'm just going to encourage our listeners not to discount the simplicity of some of the things that we've talked about here. Challenge yourself to apply them, to test them out, to explore the possibilities that maybe in order for you to double your business, you might need to do less, and you need to slow down and start looking inward for the real issue of why you're not moving forward, and stop blaming your people. I'll just put it out there with love. Stop blaming your people. Look inside.
With love.
Yeah. So I always say leader is a transformation, take action. So, take action on something that you learned here today, whether it's, taking that energy, that nervous energy and spreading it to the outward, edges, whatever it is, take action on something today. We'd love to hear your stories and how this has impacted you and how it is transforming the way that you see yourself, others, and the world in which you live. And we'd love to hear about that. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. Of course, you can find us on social as well. And thanks again for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders Transformation.
Thank you, Nicole.